Hello indie game fans, with 2021 winding down, it is once again time to look forward to releases in 2022, where we are beginning, of course, with Metroidvanias. I have removed long in development games that I'm not sure will release next year, and mixed in some new titles that look awesome, with the bulk of these games being either 2022 or TBA releases. Let's begin with AWAKEN Astral Blade, a gorgeous looking game that does remind me of Vigil The Longest Night due to the art style. From my interactions with the team, I believe that they are not native English language speakers, so there is concern over translation, but the action and giant bosses looks great, so it gets on the list. One of the new titles that I have my eye on is Moadra, a sci-fi Metroidvania entry that certainly looks to be more on the Metroid end of things. Certainly helping is the fact that our main character looks like Predator from the Alien vs Predator franchise, exploring a vast alien world in order to seek redemption. In line with Metroid, the primary attacks here are all ranged options, with a variety of rolls, dodges and jumps in the mix, which gives it quite the sense of speed. Interestingly, progression and upgrades here are freeform, so you can choose how to upgrade your weapons and so on, although I do expect the Metroidvania traversal abilities not to be included in this system. Still, a fantastic looking title that made an immediate impact, making this one to watch. Fans of the channel will be familiar with Lone Fungus as well, a self-styled mushroom Metroidvania, which is certainly inspired by Hollow Knight. Play as the last mushroom alive, who has to traverse an ancient world built by different mushroom cultures, defeating bosses and gaining abilities in the process. The map looks pretty extensive, with 13 areas to explore, where this does have more of a focus on precision platforming with a large number of spikes. It had a successful Kickstarter campaign earlier this year, which enabled the developer to go full-time, and while the Kickstarter campaign had a targeted release of October 2021, it has since slipped and hopefully will be out next year. One of the long in development titles that I'm fairly certain will be ready by next year is Rune Fencer Illyia, a pixel art entry where you play as a young rune fencer searching for her missing twin sister after their airship crash lands in a fallen kingdom. It looks very ambitious in terms of scope, with the world map looking to be quite large, having 140 unique enemies and even 100 recipes for crafting items. You have a variety of attacks at your disposal, including a conjured blade, as well as a variety of magical attacks. As such, I do think that this is one of the more promising entries of the year and am looking forward to this. One of those games that was initially slated for 2021 but got pushed to next year is Curse of the Sea Rats, a self-styled Metroidvania with some of the most amazing art and animation that I have ever seen. It is set in 1777 Ireland, following 4 prisoners of the British Empire who have been turned into rats by a pirate witch, having to fight their way through dangerous bosses as they seek the witch to undo the curse. The look of this does remind me of 90s Disney animated movies, which is wonderful, which, combined with the Metroidvania structure, makes this of interest. Curiously, there are 4-player characters and even supports 4-player co-op, looking more like a 2D brawler, but it is a non-linear Metroidvania, making this one to watch. I covered ITORAH a number of times this year, where I was drawn to the game due to the gorgeous art and fluidity of animation, where you play as the last human in a world inhabited by strange, masked beings. A mysterious plague that threatens everything is the main driver of the narrative, contributing to the grim dark vibe of the game, but it simply looks amazing, so it caught my eye. Haiku, the Robot, is a game from a solo developer whom I've been following along for a little bit since it looks like he's living the indie dream, being successfully funded on Kickstarter, which allowed him to go full-time on this project. It is another title which definitely has some Hollow Knight DNA in this, but where you play as a little robot, exploring a virus-infected world filled with corrupted robots, trying to find answers about the state of the world. While the initial footage and screenshots shown off were very orange and brown, this new trailer does show off some of the new biomes, which are green and blue respectively, so there is visual variety, and like Lone Fungus above, had an initial release window of October 2021, but has since been changed to TBA, so hopefully we will get to play next year. A game that I had my eye on but have yet to cover is DOOMBLADE, where it did get a visual overhaul recently and refined its concept and character. You play as Gloom Girl, the last of the Gloom folk, lured out of hiding by a sentient weapon known as DOOMBLADE, where together, Doom and Gloom go about getting revenge on those who imprisoned the weapon in the first place. One of the highlights here is the combat and action, where there does appear to be quite the amount of air control, as you're able to zoom from one enemy to the next. In fact, this mechanic looks similar to their previous title in Shadowbug, which I remember covering on this channel way back when, making it another title of interest.
This is where it all starts, little one. Down to the depths we depart.
Another game that has appeared on this channel before is Transmute, one that has a fairly obvious Metroid influence from the character design, weapons and alien setting. I do have to eat my words, since the last time I talked about this, I said that Nintendo no longer made any 2D Metroid games, but lo and behold, Metroid Dread got announced and released within the same year and apparently sold pretty well, so let's see if that trend continues. Back to Transmute. It is about as classic a Metroid game as can be, where me being me, I do love the pixel art, so of course it gets a spot. Another pixel art entry of interest is 9 Years of Shadow, one where you play as a young woman having to end a curse and to restore colour to the world. There are elemental armor sets that correspond to fire, water and earth, which are used both in combat and as the basis for the Metroidvania traversal abilities. Evidently, the developers are not afraid to use colours, with lush, vibrant landscapes being another title successfully funded on Kickstarter, which I hope will live up to the hype. A title successfully kickstarted just about a year ago is Chiaroscuro, recently celebrating its 1-year milestone with a post on Kickstarter, where updates have been pretty frequent and it looks like development is going well. When this was first revealed, of course many people compared this to Hollow Knight, but I'm of the opinion that of course every Metroidvania developer should look at that game since it is one of the best in the genre and look to implement what they learned from that into their own games. The rather unwieldy title is an Italian term defined as the strong use of contrast between light and dark, being rather appropriate for this monochrome title, where our main character explores a world fallen into darkness, where only a few precious flickers of light remain, where according to the Kickstarter campaign, this is supposed to release in June 2022, so let's see if it makes the date. The developer of Islets did reach out to me, since I covered and quite liked his earlier game named Shippo from 2020, and having taken a look at this game, I'm all in on this. The hand-drawn art here is fantastic, while I love the skyscapes and the design of the boss character with a ton of swords in this trailer. The interesting part is that you're adventuring in various floating islands to defeat bosses, after which you can reactivate the magnetic core to cause different islands to join back together, being described as surprisingly wholesome by the developer, where the thing that this game is doing with the map is like nothing that I have ever seen. A game that dropped a couple of spots is Gestalt, Steam and Cinder, a beautifully detailed high-bit pixel art entry with one of the most respected pixel artists in the industry working on this game. It is a steampunk entry where you're uncovering the plots and corruptions of the city's overseers, where I do like the RPG upgrade systems and stats, leaning more on the Castlevania end of things. This has been delayed from 2020 to 2021, and yet we have still no signs of release, so more than likely it will release next year, where the multiple delays have dampened my excitement for this. One of the pixel art entries that I've been looking forward to is Akatori, one that appeared on this channel a number of times as well, but we did get a better look at this game in summer this year. This is a combat-focused title where there is even a fighting game style combo meter as you battle enemies, with the unique hook being that there is a dimension switching element. There appears to be a Japanese mythology-inspired fantasy world and a grim-dark cyberpunk world filled with all sorts of robotic enemies, but I certainly appreciate the variety and duality of the setup, and I'm curious as to how this fits in with the story. I had a little bit of a brain fart when I first came across Glimmer in Mirror, another beautiful hand-drawn entry which is set in a fantasy world, but where the primary attack is ranged, which made me question whether or not to count this as a Metroidvania, and then, of course, Metroid is ranged, so there's no reason for this not to be. It has you exploring a world within a mirror, without much more details available on the story and plot, and does come to us from a Chinese developer, so I am concerned about the translation. Still, it looks gorgeous and well made, so I will be keeping an eye on this. Let's kick off the top 5 with a very out of left field pick in Turbo Kid, a title successfully kickstarted recently with a planned release in October next year. This title is interesting for a number of reasons, one of which is that it is based on the movie of the same name from 2015. and the second of which is that somehow a BMX bike is involved in the gameplay. This takes place after the events of the movie, but even if you have not watched it, it still looks like a great time, especially since combat with both melee and ranged weapons looks fantastic, and the post-apocalypse in 1997 is a fascinating setting. Doesn't hurt that the pixel art is great as well, so of course I'm down for this. Frontier Hunter Urza's Wheel of Fortune is quite an interesting looking entry since it has a 2.5D look like Bloodstained Ritual of the Night and has a very intriguing 3-character setup. It appears that you can switch between these characters on the fly, each having their own special abilities, but when you are playing as any character, the others can be called upon as supporting attackers almost like in a fighting game. It comes to us from developer ITORAH, who made the underrated roguelite platformer in Tower Hunter Urza's Trial, with the lead character being the same from the earlier game. I like the mixture of fantasy and modern technology, where you can have dragons and scorpions next to bazookas and airships, where in general, randomly mashing things together usually doesn't work, but it does in this case. One of the no-brainer picks from this list is The Last Faith, essentially Blasphemous meets Bloodborne in more ways than one. The setting and story is very similar to that of Bloodborne, where a city prospered but fell into decay after the spread of a mysterious disease, causing horrific monsters to roam the streets. Our protagonist is haunted by dreams of prophecy and ventures into this capital city seeking answers, having to fight his way through in order to do so. Me being me, of course I love the pixel art, which is where the blasphemous comparison comes in, only instead of Catholic motifs, it is more classically Gothic horror, being the what-if scenario if Castlevania stuck with pixel art into the modern age. This game was initially slated for 2021, but the release got changed to TBA, most likely due to COVID, so here's hoping that 2022 will be the year. I know. I said that I would primarily be covering 2022 games on the list, but Crow Swan, despite being a 2023 release, is too good not to cover. From the look and action, this has quickly risen up to become one of the most anticipated Metroidvanias, with many people believing it to be the second coming of Hollow Knight, which of course had discourse around the situation regarding a subgenre of Metroidvania being referred to as Hollow Knight-likes. Sidestepping that mess, the action and environments looks fantastic, with a variety of abilities both in combat and for traversal, looking like it has all the elements to be another mega smash hit, so I absolutely cannot wait for this. Speaking of Hollow Knight, of course Silksong is top of this list, being one of the most anticipated games ever since it is the sequel to the best indie Metroidvania of all time. Instead of the knight, you play as Honnet, one that is supposed to control much more differently, with new mechanics and a whole new world to explore. I love the duality here in contrast to the original, where the first was all about descending into the dank underground kingdom of Hello Nest, and the sequel is about ascending through a kingdom of silk and song. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that I do not have any updates on the status of this game, where the developers are oddly quiet, last writing a blog post in December 2019. I believe at least one of the developers just had a kid, which means well-deserved time off, so I can only hope that they are heads down in development and wish them all the best. Side note, please do not pester them since it will only distract them from the actual work, so I'll be happy to patiently wait for this and hope that the wait will be worth it, taking the number 1 spot. For more Metroidvania games, watch these videos and I will see you after the jump.